No. All right. Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. I have Dan with me. If you've been to our webinars before, I think you know the drill, but we'll give everyone maybe about 30 seconds to a minute to join. But if you're here with us today, please say hello in the chat, drop your LinkedIn, do all the networking, connecting, all that fun stuff. And if you have questions along the way, please post your questions in the questions tab, and we'll do our best to get to them either in the order they're received or how it relates to the topic that we're talking about. We did post a survey in our Discord community. So if you're in our community, I'm sure you've seen it, where we've kind of asked you guys for whatever questions you might have for Dan. We collected almost 50 questions from everyone. We probably collected a lot more, but there were some repeat questions. So we distilled it down to 50. All right. So we have someone from DC. We have someone from Boston. Good morning. Morning for me, evening for Dan. Seattle, Canada. Oh, Germany. Hello. Everyone's joining us from all over the world. This is amazing. No, we got someone from London. 2.
Hello. Oh, hello, London. Times 2.
All right. All right, cool. We have friends. We have friends in the chat. Amazing. So yeah, if you're just joining us, again, we're going to repeat. Say hello in the chat. Throw down your LinkedIn, connect with each other, all that fun stuff. And then if you have questions along the way, please post them in the questions tab. We have about 45 minutes to an hour with Dan today, so we're going to try to get through as much as possible. So I'm actually going to turn it over to Dan. Dan, would you like to say hi, introduce yourself a little bit before we dive into questions?
Yeah, sure. Hello, everyone. As you know, my name's Dan. I'm a product designer. I studied with Design Lab actually with Emily, like same sort of time. I think you're a couple of months ahead of me. So back in 2016, 2017. And yeah, like super happy to be here and like answer your questions and yeah, meet you all virtually. So yeah, hello.
Before we dive into questions, someone is asking, can we talk about plant care? Dan, are you a plant parent?
I am, and it is a background. It is a background. Like, yeah, it's not the best. It's not the best. I'm used to Google Meets, and they're actually pretty good, but this one is like, it's pretty sketchy.
This is kind of funky. I actually have to close my door behind me.
Yeah, unfortunately, there's too much of a mess there for me to cover up any other way.
We just like to mask everything and make everything seem all hunky-dory.
Sure.
Cool. And I just realized I also did not say hi to everyone. So hi again. I am Emily. I'm the community manager at Design Lab. This is Dan. We both studied Design Lab at the same time a very long time ago. And we've actually not had a chance to catch up in the last couple of years. So this is also going to be a mini catch up between me and him as well. So yeah, this will be fun. All right, Dan. So we're going to dive right in. The first thing I do want to ask is, how was life right after graduation when you're trying to look for your first design job compared to like today when you're trying to either get into someplace new or maybe do something different? How's that journey changed for you?
Yeah, I mean, it's a good question. There's a lot less fear. I remember like when I was coming, I actually started looking for my first job before I graduated, right? But I remember that time. It was like Q1 2017, and it was really, really like stressful, to be honest. Like, you know, you're trying to pivot into a new career. There's lots that you don't know or understand about the hiring process or about what people are looking for, the types of roles to go for. Whereas now, when I am looking to make a move or to take a step in a different direction, I feel like I have a much, much better understanding of the landscape. And then like within that, the roles that interest me, and I know the things to look out for. So like, in short, like looking for jobs now, and like it comes down a little bit more to personal preference, whereas at the time I was like, I'm looking for a good opportunity, where now I'm like have a bit more agency over my career.
So that actually brings up a really interesting pivot topic. I'm sure you remember when we were students, right? We're looking for the best opportunity. So we're not necessarily trying to pigeonhole ourselves down a specialization, right? So that's always been the question is, do I generalize? Do I specialize? So you kind of talked about that, but I guess what would your advice be for folks who are just starting out to look for roles or are going to start looking soon? How would you advise them in terms of like how to approach looking for roles?
Yeah. In short, I think it's quite hard to specialize when you don't have a lot of experience. And we could have a conversation about product design, UX design, UX UI, like all of these other titles that you might see. But I think when you're trying to pivot into a new role, and this is something that I've told like all of my mentees over the years, is like you need to sell all of the skills that you also have and accumulated before design. So like I think it's really important to not be afraid of being a generalist. I'm still a generalist, to be honest with you. I'm not like 10x at any particular discipline or any way that you'd assess a designer. I'm not off the charts in any of them. But like being able to like contribute in many different ways, being able to speak the language of research, of design, of business, like even without like the UX UI confinement, I think is really useful. And I think by applying to a range of jobs, you also start to get an understanding of how you're perceived by the market, and what the response is like. And that's the data that you want. Like you need to see what's working. And like I would just honestly, I don't want to say machine gun approach, but apply to a range of jobs like when you're starting out, for sure.
Cast like a really wide net, right? Like you might,
sure.
you'll never know, right? And I think at least in our experience, there are roles that are labeled as senior. There are roles that are labeled as a certain level or whatever, but the company just also may not know what they're looking for.
100%. And like, so that applies to seniority, but it also applies to skill set, right? So you might come in like as a UX designer, but what's actually needed is a brand designer, or like you might come in as a product designer, but it's just a pure UX discovery project, or like it might be again UX design or product design, but it's research heavy. Like so you really need to just apply, have the conversations and see like the problems that they're trying to solve, because you still to this day, I cannot infer too much from a job title unless it's from a top tier company. But even within that, there's specific context and domains within those companies, like which may affect like how you actually work.
Exactly. So you mentioned that you're less fearful now, especially when looking for roles. So what did your fears look like in the beginning when you're first starting to look versus what do your fears look like now?
So I think like the top level fear at the time was definitely like, can I do this? Am I good enough? Like
imposter syndrome?
For sure.
Major.
Imposter syndrome for sure. And then like within that, like the financial implications of not getting a job, right? I needed a job because I needed to earn money. So it's both of those things, and they're not incredibly pleasant to experience at the same time. So like the fear was, can I do the job? And like, can I like sustain my living and earn money, like and get a job basically. So it's like getting a job and being able to execute. That was like my fear. Even though obviously like you go through the course and I took on side projects towards the end. So like I'd had more data to suggest that like I could do a good job within the right like experience or within the right context. But now my fear is more around, am I going to put myself in a position where I can be successful? So that's the company, the role, my colleagues. Like these are the things that I care more about. Like what's the culture of the business? If it's a startup or early stage, like do they have the right people in place? To what extent am I going to have to fight for design? Like that's always a challenge, but there are different levels to that. So that's what I care about now. That's the fear, and that's what I care about.
You get to choose what you want to be fearful about now versus like back then it's all fear.
Yeah, for sure. Like you definitely have more agency. Although I would say that the notion of being able to like pick and choose, like it's not exactly the case. Like I've been contracting for 4 years, and it's not like every time I look for a job there are like 30 offers or even 5 offers at that moment for me. Like sometimes you have to take things which might not be like your 10-star job or 11-star experience if you want to leverage Airbnb, but like you have to take a variety of projects as a contractor or freelancer.
Yep. You've done both in-house, right? And you're a contractor. So,
yeah.
You know, I know that's always like a big topic. And I feel like sometimes there are also misconceptions about being a contract worker, but in your experience, do you have a preference, and do you like have any like pros, cons about each that you might be able to share, just kind of generally?
Sure. Yeah. So, I mean, I'm still contracting. So, like, my preference has been for the last 4 years to continue to contract. There have definitely been moments where I've spoken to companies about in-house roles, and going back in-house. And I think the appeal of that is that there's more career progression. Like, as a contractor, you're going to cap at day rate and cap at progression, because you're basically, you just become like a more senior IC, a senior individual contributor. So I think I've kind of gone through the point of like accumulating like decent experience, having a degree of autonomy, and now like it's more like I'm thinking more about like, where do I want to be in 5 years, and contracting is probably not going to get me to where I want to be. So then you kind of like look at things a little bit differently.
I know, I know that at least from my conversations with certain, students or even like alumni, there's, fear around contracting, and kind of like what you're mentioning, right? Like there's that level of security that's certainly not in place. You do have to put yourself out there more, because once a contract job is over, what do you do, right? Or like, is there potential for extension, or, do you have something on your plate already, ready to go? But if someone were to ask you, if you like, would you recommend that everyone at least try a contract job, just for the sake of like understanding the differences between being in-house versus just on a project? Are there pros and cons to that?
Yeah, I think in almost all cases I would recommend it. I honestly think the idea of starting out as a contractor or freelancer is a terrible idea. Like I like the idea of doing a boot camp or any course and thinking I want to contract and then expect to get top tier clients. I think it's like it's not that realistic. So yeah, sorry, I forgot the additional prompt in your questions. Could you just repeat that?
Yeah, no worries. If like, I guess like if someone were kind of on the fence about it, like, and they're like, should I consider it? Right.
Yeah.
There's obviously pros and cons for each.
Yeah.
Like, I guess that you would recommend that they try it, but like any specific reason as to like why they should?
Yeah, for sure. So I would recommend trying it because you'll understand the business pressures of design a lot more, and you'll understand like how more about like how pieces of work are spun up or why projects are created. And you also have to deal with different pressures. Like as a contractor, like my release clause is like typically like 1 day or 3 days or 5 days, and you have a lot more responsibility to drive projects to success. Otherwise, like you don't have a job, like quite literally. Like whereas in-house, I think you have a lot more protection just in general. Like projects change and things shift, and it's okay. But as a contractor, if the project changes, like you're cooked basically. So I think it's really good to understand like what that experience is like, and working more with business stakeholders. I think it's a really good experience, and it's really important to understand like how to lead projects. But this is also why I don't think you should do it as a junior, because you won't know how to do these things, and you'll put yourself in a position where like it's either probably not going to be a great contract, or you're going to be like put in a situation where you can't be successful, which ties me back to my like previous response. Like I care about being successful, which means I care about the environment that I put myself in. Conversely, like in-house, like pros and cons being in-house, it gives you like a much better opportunity to learn in a structured way, opposed to like just being thrown in and having to deliver. And I think you get far more support. You get more time for like pastoral care, mentoring, all of these sorts of things. Whereas the contractor, no one's looking to mentor you. Like it's the exact opposite. You have to pitch yourself as someone that can deliver something. And if like you're not able to deliver it, then why are you there? Like it's like a complete mindset shift. Like no one's investing in you to like grow in a role and do something. Like they want results now. So yeah.
No, that totally makes sense. And I'm assuming it's the same, right? Like at least for me, when I've contracted, like like you're mentioning, there's no onboarding period. There's no ramp up period. There's no like, here, take like 6 weeks to learn a product or learn about our service. Like that's all out the window. So I would say though, if, for our audience here, if you are someone who actually learns better by being thrown into the fire, and you are that person who isn't afraid to tackle anything head on with zero context, then by all means, like, this shouldn't scare you into like wanting to try out contract work as a start. Like, but you do have to be very real with yourself, right? And like, ask yourself these important questions. Like, are you able to deliver on things where there's complete ambiguity from the beginning, and it'll pretty much be ambiguous the whole time until you ask the questions. No one's just gonna serve you what you need. That's just not gonna happen.
100%. Like my job, even is always dealing with ambiguity. I feel like you get paid to deal with ambiguity. That's what, if I could like reframe what design is, at least in like modern UX jobs, it's like you're being paid to deal with ambiguity, to reduce it, and to prove the hypothesis or an idea that you have is something that's viable. At least if we're talking early stage work. I also think there's a fundamental difference between taking on a freelance project as a junior and like full-time contracting. So I think like a good way to test it out is to like take on a freelance project, something which like maybe you're not confident you can deliver it, but like it's within the scope, right? Like you can, it's something that's like that you think you can stretch towards, and then sink or swim, but like roughly that you can deliver it. I think that's very different to being like a full-time contractor and like working as a consultant. Like I think that's something which requires a bit more experience. But also I'll be transparent in saying I think as someone without a lot of experience, I think you're going to struggle to get put on like a full-time contract role.
Again, unless you come with some skill sets, right? Where maybe you've come from even project management, that can actually help you a lot. Like if you can learn how to manage your time and your tasks and your projects, like that's a huge strength. I guess that actually leads us to a really good pivot. Have you, I guess, as a freelance / contract designer, do you feel like you also have to PM your own work, project manage your own work?
I guess for sure. I don't. It's an interesting question because the answer is yes, but I don't look at it that way. I write it in my mind. I reframe it as like designing and creating the brief, and like you're constantly like massaging and shaping the brief as you go, which means like practically speaking, you determine the touch points, you determine the cadence. So yeah, like you're doing this like meta organization of like how to deliver something. Yeah, for sure. Like that. Yeah, there's no one. There's definitely no one like telling me really like how to get somewhere, or like I'm held accountable by like the end result. Like everything else I have to do myself, and I have to organize people just to a certain extent, or help to organize like everything else around me. Yeah, for sure. Unless like I'm working in a consultancy or an agency, and I might just be an IC designer and there's a PM there.
Right.
That's the exception.
Yep, definitely. We have a question in the chat, and then for anyone else, toss your questions in the questions tab. But we have a question from Kate, and it's kind of dialing it back a little bit, but interested into how you decided to enter the world of product design.
Sure. Yeah. So I was interested in art and interested in psychology. And in my mind, like I connected these things. Like I wanted to do something creative, and I wanted to do something that like placed an emphasis on understanding people or gave me the ability to learn more about people. So that was like the initial trigger. There was also an element of wanting a job which like would allow me to travel, like digital nomad thing. So that's something that I was interested by, but I think primarily like I wanted something creative, and that was like the initial pull.
I actually wanted to ask you something about something you said earlier. Do you feel like UX / product designers are like lawyers for our role, our industry?
In what sense?
So our friend Robin, for those who know Robin, our group crit facilitator, Robin and I have kind of had a conversation that like, because big part of our jobs is to ask the questions to figure out which avenues we got to go down in terms of design, thinking about interaction, UI, all that stuff. But there's that component of needing to also defend our choices and defend our designs to people who may not understand. And, especially people who are like, they have a certain vision, we interpret that vision a little bit differently, and then we're showing them something that we think is answering what they want, but they don't see it. So in a sense, we've kind of said like, well, we're kind of lawyers for our industry, because we have to sit there and actually make a case for why this would be the best or most optimal user experience.
Yeah, that's interesting. I've never thought of that framing. I like it. Yeah, I think there's a lot of truth to that. There's a lot of truth to that, for sure. I think, again, like context and client specific, but definitely. And this is like what I was partially alluding to at the beginning of the conversation, where I said like the considering which sort of ways that I want to fight for design or fight to do my job. Like, and that's something which I see as like part and parcel. But sometimes if you're going like too much against like typically a founder with their vision, like that's when it just becomes a little bit tedious. But like the way to proceed with something like that is to try and influence through research and data. Like try and take the subjectivity out of it. And that's really hard, because people have an emotional attachment to a solution or an idea or a vision. So I try and make it as objective as possible, because otherwise, like it's a really you are like in the courtroom, right?
Yeah, pretty much. Okay, so piggybacking off of what you just said, are there any specific challenges? You don't have to like go into like specifics with like who or whatnot, but are there any specific challenges that you can think of that have arisen from needing to defend your designs, or like really try to sell something to someone where they're convinced that you didn't deliver on whatever they're envisioning, but you're like, no, I really did, and here's why. But was any of that like a challenge, and how did you kind of go through that? For everyone here, if you can't tell, our jobs are very complex. Like it's not linear at all. It's like take the infinity symbol, but then link like 8 of them together and just keep going back and forth. That's our life.
For sure. That's a really interesting question. And honestly, like I have a few examples of that, but for the most part, like I'm able to navigate away from like the challenges, because I normally try and make it either I wouldn't be on a project where I felt like too much of that, I wouldn't stay on it for too long, or I try and drive it to like evidence-based and objective like ways of working. So talking about, okay, as an example, if we don't trust this, let's test it, let's get feedback, and let's just cut out that conversation straight away. Or like, you believe something, what's the evidence? Okay, and then I'll try and like leverage research. So I feel like the challenges, like I kind of pivot into opportunities. Like that's kind of like how I look at it. And the longer I've been working, the more successful I am in doing that. Not to say that you can't have experience of being in a situation where that is your reality, because 100% it can be. And I have been in a situation like that where I've had good experience, and and I was experiencing that, and it's a really tough place to be. So the challenges were, like business unit A versus business unit B, and I'm in business unit B. And trying to move the project along or trying to get to a good point was really, really challenging. And I like had to pick the battles, and I try and think like long term. So if I don't care, because I also don't care too much about the specifics of a design, I care about the outcome or the behavior change. So I'm willing to let people nitpick on drop shadow X or typography Y or image X. Like I don't care. Like I want to ship it and then see what happens. So
you're very nice to let people
a few different answers.
Shadows.
Yeah.
I do not let my stakeholders nitpick at drop shadows. I'm like, no, we need to have important conversations first.
For sure.
All right, so we're gonna pivot. We have a question from Christine, and this one's come up from our community questions as well. But in your opinion, do you think the field of UX/product design has changed since we've graduated from boot camp? And if yes, how so?
Oh,
I have a thought, but I want to hear yours first.
Yeah.
I feel like it's like a yes and no situation. For anyone who's new to UX, the answer is always it depends. That's our default answer is it depends.
For sure. Context is king. I think what has changed is, I think overall, like there are more companies that understand the role. And I think there's more prevalence of the word product designer. So like that, you'll see that job title a lot more. I think particularly in-house, like you'll see that it's almost ubiquitous. Agency side, like you'll still see like UX, like pure UX. So I think that's one thing that's changed. Like you'll find more product design roles, and there seems to be some sort of convergence about what that actually entails as a job in a lot of like companies, which is great. I think what hasn't changed is like the lack of understanding in so many companies. It's like things are getting better and they're getting worse because design is like more respected as a discipline than I think it was 5 years ago, but that means that more companies are like looking for designers without knowing what that means. So like actually it's probably a net loss in terms of companies that like understand design. But there are also like more jobs where like there are more good jobs as well, but we have more jobs overall, but that's like more good and bad. I think that's kind of like what I'm saying. So yeah, I do think that if you want to give like a purely positive spin to like what I've just said, there are more good jobs out there, and that's really good to see. Like you can work in lots of different types of companies, and like there's more like understanding for sure. That's definitely the case. It's definitely the case. But the reality is that design is still going through, like, I think all disciplines are constantly doing this, like, but design is going through a process of maturing, which means there are lots of like companies that have the role but don't know what it means. But it also means there are more jobs for you as well. So yeah, I mean, yes and no, to go back to your original answer.
I think this also goes back to like us talking about how, things just like, or I guess you were just mentioning, like they want designers. I don't know if anyone is as old as I am, but like when Toy Story first came out, everyone wanted the Buzz Lightyear toy. It was like the hot toy on the shelf. Like that's kind of how I see UX design and product design, like as roles. Like people, like Dan said, like more companies are understanding like, oh yeah, we do want, we probably do need this person because they can help our business, our revenue, stuff like that. But their complete lack of understanding of like the difference between UI and UX, like not even there. Like I definitely have to, it's a training thing that the designer has to bring in. But I would say the one thing that hasn't changed related to that is the consistent use of titles. Like, I think people do confuse, like you see like UI developer out there, but they expect you to be a UX designer and a front end developer, like things like that. I think that can probably improve in our industry as a whole.
Oh, for sure. And that's a truth, as is me saying that like product designer is more prevalent. There's still a lot of confusion.
Yeah.
And I think this also pins back to what I said earlier, which is,
we say a lot of things.
Yeah, no, I know, but I think like trying to like set yourself up for success, and like trying to find a role. Like, so you're saying that companies are hiring lots of designers, or more companies are interested in the shiny new toy, but there's a lack of understanding about discipline. But there's also within like business operations a lack of understanding about how to make that discipline successful within the business. So like it's not even just like UX versus UI. It's also like, okay, we have a designer in a company. How can they do their work? How can we help?
What's our value?
Yeah, for sure.
Actually, this might be a hot question. So we're talking about the lack of understanding from the company side, but in your opinion, do you also think that there might be a lack of understanding from people who are interested in this field or getting into this field? Like people who are like, might be looking at entering UX design, either their career transitioning for whatever reason it is. But do you think, at least based on your conversations, do you think people may not actually understand what it means to be a UX designer?
Oh, 100%. There's like Instagram versus reality. 100%. And like we're responsible for that as individuals, like of having these expectations. And I think the sooner that you realize that you're operating within a business, the better, because there are like ideal ways of working, but the reality is you always have constraints. And again, tying back to picking which battles to fight, or like choosing an environment where you can be successful, I think we have to understand that we're working within business like everybody else. and that's like a really good language for you to speak. That's the expectation to manage, is that unless the business is making money, unless you're adding value, whether that's making money or saving money, then you're not getting it.
For sure, for sure. Okay, we're gonna do a blast from the past question, and then we're gonna dive into a question about the future. So the past question is there anything, looking back with the knowledge that you have now, anything that you would have done differently at looking at your journey in Design Lab that could affect or could have affected, things after?
In Design Lab?
Mm-hmm. Like anything you learned, or maybe how you learned something, how you approach something?
Oh, I honestly wish that I participated a lot more in the community, and I thought that when I started mentoring 2 years ago, I don't mentor that often, but it's something that I always push my students to do, is get involved in as many crits as possible, seek feedback as much as possible, and particularly I don't really enjoy public speaking, and I didn't really have a lot of confidence when it came to presenting my work. And you need to get over that, and I didn't get over it. I'm like, okay, I'll share work with my mentor, and I'll go to the group crits, but I didn't really dominate them. And I think that's what I wish I'd done more of, is just make the most of the experience, smash my mentor with requests, smash my mentor with submissions, and realize that they're a resource to be used. And there's the accountability angle, but really you're just doing yourself a disservice if you don't make the most of the opportunity, particularly if you've got a great mentor. It's just what are you doing? It's like a lottery ticket to cash in. So I don't really regret not learning more about specific A or topic Y or whatever it is, but I think just generally making the most of the crits and the opportunities to collaborate.
I thought you did fine. You came to my crits.
Yeah, no, I did. But I didn't dominate it. I wasn't I got the result that I wanted at the end, right? But I think that's the feeling that I had when I left. It was you could have made more out of the opportunity.
Thank you for doing a community plug for everyone here who is part of the community right now. It has largely evolved since Dan and I were in community as students together. Has changed completely.
I bet it was very small. It was very small back in the day.
Very tiny. Fun fact: Dan's cohort was the smallest cohort we've ever had. You had 35 students. Today, on average, I think we have anywhere from 120 to 150 per cohort. So wow, that's giving everyone a good landscape right there. Okay, so future question, topic related question. But what are your thoughts about AI and its place in product design?
Oh yeah. Yeah, it's a really, really interesting question. And I'm thinking about this from multiple perspectives. One is will I have a job in 5 years? And if I do, what would that look like? I'm also thinking about it in terms of products that I could build. I'm also thinking about it in terms of a business that I can evolve, or taking on freelance work. The short answer is I don't know. I think it's yeah, for sure. It is now. From what I've seen, I think there's definitely going to be a change in the way a lot of low-tier agencies work. The generating a wide variety of concepts, concept design, is going to become more commoditized. UI design, I think, particularly low to medium level, will be more commoditized. I think we'll be able to design more quickly, test things more quickly, for sure. I think obviously there are so many things trending on LinkedIn all the time of a new tool. You can just type in a certain number of commands, and then it spits out a UI. So that's obviously going to evolve, and a lot of the low level dribble work's going to be killed, right? But this is also where I think you can continue to differentiate yourself as a UX designer, is that you bring in a lot of intangibles, and that human element is going to become more important than if we were just talking about a pure UI course. That's a bit more of a challenging conversation, I think.
So this actually ties into the next part of the question, which is tooling in general. How do you stay up to date with existing tools and also like what's coming up, like, at things that are going to be newly launched. Like, how do you keep up with all of the things that are coming out? Because there's so much, right? There's always so much competition. People are always trying to one up each other.
Yeah.
People try to one up Figma, but it's yet to happen now. We really thought for a long time that Sketch was just going to be the thing for the longest time, and then Figma came in and said, nope, Sketch, you're like irrelevant now.
Yeah.
Yeah. So how do you keep up with all of it?
Yeah, I mean, the honest answer is like I don't. I'm not that much of a tool nerd. I I believe that they are tools, right? And like we need to be able to use them to the extent that like a project demands, or we need to do our job. So I invest more in like the depth of understanding within certain tools. So in terms of like design tools, I use Figma and Webflow. And like I know there are other things out there, like ProtoPie, like sounds like it's quite interesting. Like I've used it a little bit. Frame has evolved its proposition over the last few years, so like I think that's probably like worth trying depending on your role. But I kind of, unless I need to learn something in order to like be better at my job, I don't like explore too much, because I'm working within companies that have these tools. And like you say, Figma, like you can say with a good level of confidence that in a year's time, it's still going to be important, and probably 5 years as well. So like for me, it's more about like being better with those tools and just continuing to like look at any releases that they make, check out the updates, look at any like videos that they put out. So it's more about like becoming better with the tools that I believe like are going to be successful and that I actually use. And if you look at like Figma and Webflow in particular, they're in such a good position in the market that like the product's going to keep getting better and better. They'll suck up more of the market. So yeah.
Now that we've been designers for a while, do you feel like as a more senior designer that it's a little bit easier to fall by the wayside on like picking up new things versus like when we were just starting out, you kind of want to learn everything. You want to know everything. Do you think the perspective is different now?
100%. But I think it also ties back to like the lack of understanding that you have coming in to a UX design role. Like you imagine that you're always going to be creating new UIs or always building design systems, but very rarely the case unless you're working in agencies where you do a lot of like creative work or new projects. So for me, like 9 times out of 10, I'm using a design system that already exists, which I have to augment for the 10% of the time that I don't. Like I build it. But for the most part, like I'm using something that's there, and me becoming 5% better with Figma, like that's not really going to have a tangible impact on becoming better with my job, because I'm not always working on the implementation side. So 100%, because there are genuinely more important things to worry about for me. As like as long as if you can design quickly and you're proficient, you can build design systems that scale, you can use components, you can change them, like that's like that the box is pretty much ticked, unless you're looking for a real specialist role, in my opinion. So yeah.
We actually have a related question to design systems. Someone's asking in general of your experience, like in your experience, how often do you work out of a design system, or have you, versus having to sit there and create like new components, new experiences? How would you break up that percentage if you had to?
Yeah, so I'll probably give a slightly different lens on the question, but when there's an existing product, I'm always using a design system. When I'm creating a new product, I typically create components or patterns or elements if it's like very early stage. But that's not so much about the scalability of the design system. It's more about like proving the concept. And that's my response really. So I'd say in terms of percentage, like 95% of the time there's something to work with. And when there's not, it's because it doesn't exist, and it means that we're starting at a more conceptual level.
But even, at least in my experience, right, even when you're creating either a brand new product or even new experience, you don't always necessarily need to reinvent the wheel. There's a bunch of resources out there that you can use to start off with. A slightly more advanced way to approach it, is talk to your development team. If you have access to them, ask them, what language they're going to be building all this stuff in, what's their stack, because that's going to heavily help you decide on how you should create your components or your designs, because whatever you create may not always be implemented the right way, depending on whatever languages they're using. So I think that's always something that's to consider, right?
For sure. Like the way I look at design systems in the same way that I do like most aspects of the role, and it's like how can I test my thinking as quickly as possible? So I want to leverage whatever exists. So it might be another library, it might be components that already exist within Storybook, within code. Like I want to leverage whatever's there, unless I have a reason to change it. And that's kind of a different problem, right?
Yep, exactly. Put your energy towards something that actually requires that time and energy.
Yeah, exactly. Right. Unless the brief is specifically on like we need to improve the design system, or we need to improve the UI, or it's a usability issue. It's like that's like a slightly different brief, and like you would go into a lot more detail.
Yep, exactly.
With the components, right?
Exactly. All right. So we have a question from Stephen. We may not be able to get into specifics, but the question is there anything you find fun or interesting about something you're working on or something you have worked on? It can be a very general answer. Maybe just what do you find fun about doing what we're doing?
Honestly, the most fun I have is working with people. I love collaborating. I love like workshops. I love talking to people. I love getting into the details of a problem and trying to understand it. And like, that's what I love. I think it's super, super interesting. It's super fun to work from like problem to solution with a bunch of like co-workers and people that like become friends to some extent. So yeah.
I think for me, same thing, but also like once you kind of see the end product, it's almost sometimes unreal to see it as a working thing because you've worked on it on static screens for so long. And then all of a sudden the devs shoot you this link. They're like, hey, check it out. And you're like, oh my God, it's real. Like I actually like made the thing. I think I'm still in shock every time I see something that I like designed like live out in the world. That's always like really, it's like a shock to me every time.
Yeah, that's also true. That's also true. Like I've done a lot more, like at least recently, like more like early stage work and like more like R&D and conceptual stuff. So that's definitely true. Like this, it's a rush, like having people like use your product. That's really cool.
Okay, so where you are today, is this where you envisioned yourself when you just first like finished Design Lab? Or do you better, worse, about the same? What you thought?
I don't think the path that I took here is the one that I expected to take. If I was to look at like the details of everything, but like I think I probably wasn't ambitious enough, but like I think I pretty much like hit like all of my goals, like we spoke about, like having a creative job and also earning money and having autonomy. So like I think I pretty much set out like to do like what I wanted to do. I think now it's just about like, okay, what next?
Well, then let's talk. So I guess now, right? It's like, well, where do you see yourself in the next like 3 to 5 years?
Yeah. So I think like it does relate back to the freelancer or like in-house conversation. I think either in-house and like growing my career that way, like more senior roles, or on the like entrepreneurial side, like building my own product or like scaling my business. It's one of those two things. Yeah.
I think I might also feel the same way you do, because in my mindset now, similar to right, like now we have the agency to be a little bit more picky about our work environment, kind of the people that we're going to be interacting with. You know, we can actually talk about those things in interviews when we talk about, you know, prospective jobs. And I think now, you know, back in the day, like I always assumed that I would, you know, always be in more of like a startup situation, things where I'm like always constantly hands-on. Maybe I'm like a very small team. But now that I've been on a small team for such a long time, I'm like, you know, it might be nice to be on a larger team and actually share the work now, like, you know, and be able to take some time to really think about everything that I'm doing, like on a very minute scale versus like always just looking at things at an 80% lens and saying, okay, that's good. We'll wait for feedback and like change things later. It's like, I think I want to like shift positions now.
Yeah, for sure. And I think it's good. I think it's good too as well. I think it's good too. Yeah, agree.
Cool.
I agree.
Let's see. What other oof. Oh, are there any surprises of like that have happened in our industry that you like just didn't expect? Obviously, other than Adobe buying, buying out Figma, I think that was like the biggest surprise of like the last year because everyone was freaking out like, oh God, do we have to sign up for Adobe Creative Cloud? Do we have to sign up for all of that to get Figma? Thankfully, I don't think they're doing that. But is there anything like about our industry that like surprised you?
I think I still like I'm surprised when I hear about how many rounds like interviews can take, or
Oh my God.
like design challenges, like these sorts of things. I still find super surprising. To be honest with you, yeah.
What's the longest interview process you've been a part of?
I want to say 7 rounds.
What?
Yeah, and like, yeah, I have a lot of opinions about like what. Yeah, it's not common, but I mean it did happen. I actually dropped out like after like the 3rd round when they asked me to do something, but yeah, 7.
Oh my God. Jeez. I guess hot opinion, hot take question is what's your take on like whiteboard challenges or like take home challenges as part of the interview process?
So I get why they exist to some extent. I don't have any like bad feelings towards like a whiteboard challenge in person or solving a problem with the people that you might be working with. I hate take home challenges with an absolute passion. I hate them. I hate them. I hate them. I think they're I I think they're unfair. Personally, like you're not comparing like for like. So for me, I have a full-time job, right? And if I'm asked to do a take-home challenge, um, I'm probably not going to spend as much time on it as I would do if I didn't have a job. That's the first point. It doesn't consider like responsibilities that people might have at home. And like it's really really biased, and on top of that, like it doesn't. I think it assesses visual design skills more than anything else, and creativity, because it doesn't, like, even if you go through the challenge and you like state your assumptions and you reframe as much as you can, it doesn't really allow much for divergent thinking. So I don't like them. I don't like them at all.
We actually have a follow-up question about, whether or not these challenges are paid. And I know that that's also a hot topic. And if Robin were here, her answer would be, if the challenge has anything to do with the existing product of the company or even something that they might be working on, which that one is always gray area because you never know what they're actually working on, those should be paid. I would say that there's probably a consensus to say if they insist on making you do something that's related to their product or their company, it should be paid. However, if it's something just to assess your design skill and it has nothing to do with their product, that's gray area / it's, some designers will say it would be okay to take unpaid. But what do you think?
I understand the rationale. Like I personally just don't like them at all. I can understand. I think yes, 100%. If you're working on something related to the product, you should be paid. Like, I mean, 100%. And you should be paid for your time, even if it's not related. Like you should be. Like you 100% should be. But even if it's, I still wouldn't do if it was unrelated and paid. So yeah, I mean, I back in the day, like I have done them, and like I know I had the feeling that I'm just like generating ideas for them, because that's kind of that's exactly what it was. You're basically like doing free consultancy with no promise of any work. And I know there are lots of credible businesses which send them out and they have their reasons, but yeah, I'm just like, regardless of whether I'm paid or not, yeah, I'm not into it.
We don't like it. It's a hard no from us.
I don't. Yeah, I'm not into it at all.
All right, so we're going to wrap up, but we do have a lot of folks who are looking to transition to UX design and stuff. But as a mentor and senior designer, if you were hiring someone today, what would you be looking for in a candidate? And it doesn't have to be just like, skills, whatnot, but like, are there things that are just outside of tools and general skills that you would be looking for?
I think it depends a little bit on like the role that I'm looking for them to fill.
Let's say like a generalist. We'll go with like a generalist.
I think generalist in-house, let's say, I think the soft skills are like what I'm interested most in. And like the ability to deal with ambiguity, the ability to move forward, flexibility, like these sorts of things. Like as I've said, like I don't place a huge amount of emphasis for generalists on specific tools, or like the ability to make pixel perfect designs. I care most about like how people think, how people are interested in the problem. I think you have to fall in love with the problems. So that's what I'm interested in.
Are there things, I guess, based on any conversations you've had with like past students or even just people you've met like in this industry, do you feel like there are things that junior designers focus too much on that maybe they shouldn't focus on when they are looking for roles?
Yeah, that's a really, really good question, because I also know what it was like dealing with imposter syndrome, and like, your portfolio is being looked at, so they're assessing your visual design. So like you want to spend like a lot of time on it. But I don't think that's as important as like the soft skills that you have, like being able to work with other people, being able to like step away from your own ego and vanity and like deliver for the business and the people that you work with. So like I would genuinely focus on like being a good colleague and like falling in love with the problems, like opposed to like pure visual design and like that sort of thing. So that's my interpretation. That's my interpretation anyway.
No, I'm completely in alignment with you, because I think at the end of the day, for me, anyone can learn a tool, anyone can learn how to do things with a tool, but when it comes to soft skills, a lot of it is highly dependent on everyone's personality, like their own individual person. And I think the ability to be able to accept feedback is a very hard one for anyone to like learn, especially if that's not part of your work culture that you're coming from. That's a big one, because you will have a lot of people who think they understand what you're trying to tell them and they misinterpret it entirely. And they may say something that really rubs you the wrong way, but wasn't their intention. That's something that you have to learn how to just kind of scoot past and just like, just kind of stay focused on like what you're trying to get from them.
For sure.
Yeah.
+1.
Any final advice you have for everyone here who's just looking to make the transition, or, I feel like everyone here is always in these webinars just trying to look for like tidbits of like advice or just encouragement as they kind of make their journeys either towards becoming a designer or landing their first role or even their second role, right? I mean, I don't think our fear of landing roles ever goes away. It just, maybe you just become numb to it later on.
Yeah, and that kind of like feeds me on to like what my closing comment would be, and it's probably not like the inspirational thing that people are looking for.
We keep it real here.
yeah, for sure. I think just be prepared to like deal with challenging situations, and yeah, you may end up with a great role after a month, but I think the reality is over your career, like you're going to feel like you're drinking from a fire hose a lot within the role, and that's kind of like what the industry is, and just kind of embrace the chaos a little bit, and like don't take it personally if you don't get hired for a role. Don't take it personally if you don't hear back, because it's not personal. Like it's really not. So just like keep going, and just like whatever you need to do it, like find the discipline or the motivation just to keep plugging away, because that's like what's going to matter. Like consistency is key.
Before we hop off, I do want to ask you your I guess you have any advice or maybe opinions on like networking and like approaching networking?
Yeah, so I think there are different types of networking. Like at least like on my mental model, I think the first one is like networking with peers. I think that's really good for emotional support and like career advice. But I think the most important networking you can do and should do is with recruiters. That's like, yeah, I still connect with almost every recruiter that I see. because you never know. There might be, it's happened many times. They post a job, and that's like my in, and that's the conversation. Like, yeah, recruiters.
I think that that's such a strong one to end on, because I think that's not something that is brought up very often. Recruiters can be your friends. I understand that there's always situations where there are just recruiters that reach out to us and we just know that there's no legitimacy, you know, with whatever they're sending us. And that's fine. That happens. But there are legitimate recruiters out there who do want to get you jobs, because that's how they get paid. Their service to you is entirely free. They get paid by the company if they source someone for them. So if you make friends with recruiters, they may always keep you at the top of their list anytime they have a role open. Even if you have something permanent or something that you love, they may be like, are you happy? Is there something that I can find you that might make you happier? So yeah, make friends with, that's a great one to end on.
Yeah, and your clarification expansion there is like 100%. And like the best thing to do is to look within your region for reputable agencies. And that's the way you also bypass issues with legitimacy. Like if there's a good recruitment company for design in city X, like build the relationships with the people that work there, because recruiters will be in it for 10 years. They'll change companies. Like,
yes. And they may take it with them. They may literally take their leads and their lists with them.
Yeah, for sure. They do, right? So yeah, 100%.
Love it. All right. Well, we are going to end here. Dan, thank you so much. Obviously, you and I are going to keep chatting offline, but it's been great. It's so great for us to catch up, and hopefully everyone here found this helpful, just listening to us chatting away. But yeah, so hopefully we'll see you again soon. This is recorded. This will be up on our YouTube channel, all that fun stuff. If you're in our community, I will also post it in our Discord. But otherwise, if you find us on LinkedIn, find us on LinkedIn. And yeah, we will see you guys around.
Yeah.
Thank you, everyone. Thanks, Dan. I'll talk to you soon.
Yep, see you. Bye-bye.
Bye.